The coffee machine was screaming again. I knew it wasn't actually screaming, machines don't scream, but after 6 months working the graveyard shift at Dante's Diner, the espresso hiss had started to sound like something with lungs and a throat, and somewhere deep inside it, rage. The 2 a.m. crowd was thin tonight. A trucker nursing black coffee at the counter, a couple too young to be out this late, whispering in a corner booth, and the usual ghosts of night shift work, the insomniacs, the broken-hearted, the people running from something they wouldn't name. I was one of them, though I'd never admit it out loud. My name is Vera, and I was running from my father's ambition. 23 years old, art degree collecting dust in my apartment, working minimum wage plus tips in a retro diner on the edge of the warehouse district, where nobody asked questions about your past, and everyone tipped like they were buying silence. It suited me fine. It was small. It was safe. It was mine. Refill? Gorgeous? I asked the trucker, already moving toward his cup. He nodded without looking at me. They never really looked at me, and I slipped back into the rhythm that kept me sane. Pour, smile, ask about the weather. Nobody was watching. The silver pendant around my neck caught the fluorescent light, and I absently touched it, the way I always did when I was thinking too hard. My grandmother's necklace, the one she'd pressed into my palm the night before she died. Whispering something in that old language my father had tried to beat out of me. When the moon calls your name, child, you answer, even if it terrifies you. I was 23 and terrified of almost everything, so that seemed fitting. The diner's front window was fogged with November rain, and the street beyond looked like an impressionist painting, all soft smears of red and amber neon, the edges blurred into nothing. The city had a heartbeat on nights like this, a low throb of something dangerous and alive. I'd grown up here but never quite belonged to it. My father owned half the downtown, had fingers in politics and development deals and things whispered about only after midnight, but I'd chosen exile instead. Minimum wage felt like freedom. Around 2:47 a.m., the bell above the door chimed. I didn't look up from restocking the pie case cherry, blueberry, pecan, all in perfect rows like little red, purple, and brown promises that life could be sweet. But something made me pause. A shift in air pressure. The way the trucker's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. The couple in the corner stopped mid-whisper. He stumbled through the door like someone learning how to be human for the first time. That was my first thought, stupid as it sounds. Not he's hurt, not call 911, but something primal and wordless. Wrong, 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 this man is all wrong. He was tall enough that his shoulders nearly grazed the doorframe, and he wore an expensive charcoal coat that looked like it cost more than my monthly rent. Dark hair, wet from the rain, plastered to a high forehead, and his face, God, his face was like looking at someone carved from marble and then brought to life through sheer force of will. All sharp planes and severe angles, a mouth that looked like it hadn't smiled in years. But it was his eyes that made me stop breathing. They were the color of a storm, that gray-green that happens right before lightning strikes, and they were looking for something. Looking around the diner with the kind of focused desperation that made my chest tight. Looking like he was drowning, and this fluorescent-lit, grease-stained little diner was his last chance at air. Then his gaze landed on me, and I swear time did something strange. Bent sideways, rewound, played itself again. His hand moved toward his ribs, and that's when I saw the blood. Not a lot of it, he was trying to hide it, the way men who were used to pain tried to hide pain, but it was there, seeping through his white dress shirt where the coat hung open. The red looked obscene against the white, and my first thought wasn't, he's dangerous, though that came later. My first thought was, he's beautiful and he's dying, and nobody should have to die alone in a diner at 2:47 inches the morning. Sir? My voice came out higher than I intended. Are you? He stumbled forward, and I moved without thinking. That's the part I'll never fully understand, the part that changed everything. I moved toward him, instead of away. I should have run. Every instinct that had kept me alive for 23 years should have screamed at me to run, but instead I crossed the diner and caught him as his knees buckled. He was heavy, solid muscle under that expensive coat and warm like a furnace. The scent of him hit me then, something dark and expensive and wrong in a way that made my hindbrain light up like a warning beacon. Sandalwood and gunpowder and something older, something that smelled like midnight and power, and things I didn't have words for. Hospital, I breathed. But he gripped my arm with surprising strength. No. His voice was like gravel and honey, low and rough and absolute. No hospitals, no police. The couple in the corner had already bolted. The trucker was pretending he'd seen nothing, suddenly very interested in his coffee, and I was holding a bleeding man who'd just asked me to commit what was probably a felony. "You're bleeding," I said, stating the obvious like an idiot. "I know." His eyes were starting to roll back, pupils dilating. "I need somewhere safe, somewhere quiet. I can't if they find me." He collapsed against me, and his full weight sent me stumbling backward. I caught us both on a nearby booth, my palms slapping against the vinyl seat. Up close, I could see the sweat on his forehead, the white ring around his mouth, the way his breathing was getting shallow and wrong. "Okay," I heard myself say. "Okay. Hold on. Just hold on." It was the worst decision I'd ever made. It was the best decision I'd ever made. It was the moment my life split itself into before and after, and I didn't even know it yet. I was dragging him toward the back of the diner, toward the employee entrance, when I realized he was trying to say something. His lips moved silently, and I leaned in, my ear close to his mouth, and caught a single word, whispered like a prayer. "Vera." My blood stopped. He'd never seen me before. I hadn't told him my name. His eyes were barely open, consciousness slipping away, and he was whispering my name like he'd always known it, like he'd been waiting his whole life to say it. And that's when everything went wrong, or right, depending on how you looked at it. Getting him up the back stairs to my apartment was like trying to carry a wounded animal. He was trying to help, but every movement cost him, and I could feel the precise moment the adrenaline stopped working and pain became his whole world. By the time we reached my door on the 3rd floor, his breathing was ragged and his shirt was soaked through. My apartment was small, a studio that ate 90% of my paycheck, but it was clean. Books stacked on every surface, thrifted furniture arranged like puzzle pieces, and a single window that looked out over the fire escape and the city's sleeping ribs. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and now it smelled like blood and danger and a stranger's cologne. I'd called myself a lot of things in the 23 years I'd been alive, but reckless wasn't one of them. Smart wasn't a luxury my father's world allowed, so I'd made caution my religion. And now I was breaking it, burning it, salting the earth where it used to grow. "Bathroom," I said, guiding him toward the small tiled space that served as my sanctuary. "Lights on or off?" "Off." He leaned heavily against the doorframe. "And lock the door. After. I'm not leaving you alone bleeding in my bathroom while I need to see who's looking for me." His eyes found mine again, and there was something in them that looked like apology, like he already knew what coming him would cost me. "From your window. Please, before they get here. I need to know what's coming." My hands shook as I stripped off his coat. The shirt came next, and I had to help him ease it off his shoulders because moving his left arm was making him hiss through his teeth like something feral and cornered. The wound was on his ribs, a graze, thank God. Not a puncture, but it was deep enough to need stitches. And the surrounding skin was already bruising purple. "Who did this?" I asked, running water and finding my first aid kit in the cabinet beneath the sink. He didn't answer. That was answer enough. I worked in silence, cleaning the wound with hands that only shook a little, pressing gauze to the bleeding, strapping it with tape that probably wouldn't hold for more than a few hours. He stood there shirtless in my bathroom like a sculpture of something dangerous, watching my face while I worked, and I tried very hard not to think about the fact that I was touching him, that his skin was warm and his heartbeat was visible beneath my fingers, that he smelled like something that was making every cell in my body light up like a Christmas tree. "Your window," he reminded me softly. I locked him in the bathroom and went to the window facing the street. The night was quiet in that way that nights in the warehouse district weren't supposed to be quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when predators are hunting. I pressed my face against the glass and looked down at the street below, at the diner's neon bleeding pink and white onto the wet asphalt, at the few cars parked along the curb. Then I saw them. 2 black SUVs, maybe a block south, moving slow. No lights, just rolling through the night like sharks. There was a man standing on the corner under the streetlight, phone to his ear, head moving in that mechanical way that meant he was watching, searching for him. My stomach dropped. I went back to the bathroom and found him trying to ease the gauze away to examine the wound for himself. His knuckles were scraped raw, and there was blood under his fingernails. He'd fought back. He'd fought back against whoever had done this, and they'd bled for it. But not enough. "They're here," I said. "Outside. 2 vehicles, men on the streets. How bad is it? How many are coming?" He looked at me like he was trying to decide how much truth I could handle. "Bad," he finally said. "Very bad. And I can't let them find me here. I can't let them find you." "Too late for that," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. They're already looking. Your blood is probably on the diner floor. They'll trace it. Not if you close for the night. Say you had an emergency. Say the coffee machine broke and you couldn't repair it. Nothing happened here. You're innocent." "Of what?" I demanded. "What did you do? Who are you?" His jaw tightened, and I watched him make a decision. Watched him choose me, or truth, or maybe just honesty in the last moments before everything burned down. "I'm someone dangerous to know," he said quietly. "My name is Dominic Valero, and you." His eyes closed, like the sight of me was painful. "You're the one person I was never supposed to meet." The words hung in the air between us, and I felt that strange sideways shift in time again. The sensation of standing on the edge of something vast and terrible and inevitable. My grandmother's necklace felt suddenly heavy, burning against my chest. "That's a cryptic way of saying you're bad news," I said. "I'm worse than bad news. I'm a consequence." He opened his eyes and looked at me with something like regret. "And I'm already destroying you just by being here." Before I could respond, there was a knock on my apartment door. Not a knock, a pound. The kind that promised that locks wouldn't stop them for long. "Miss Theodora?" A muffled voice came through. "We're looking for someone. May have come through the area. Just need to ask a few questions." Dominic moved like liquid, pushing off the counter and toward me. He gripped my shoulders so careful not to reopen the wound, and his forehead touched mine. "Listen to me," he whispered. "Tell them you've been here all night, alone. You haven't seen anyone. You'll believe it because it's almost true." "What about you?" "I'm not dying in your apartment, love." It was the first time he'd called me something intimate, and it hit me like a physical blow. "I'm going to climb out your window, and I'm going to lead them away from you. And then I'm going to figure out how you know my real name when I've never met you before." "How you know my name," I corrected. The pounding got louder. "Because," he said, and his voice dropped to something barely audible, "I think I've been dreaming about you my entire life." He kissed my forehead so gentle it was almost a prayer, and then he was gone, moving toward the window with the kind of fluid grace that didn't match the bleeding wound in his ribs. I watched him ease onto the fire escape, watched him drop to the alley below with a cat's perfect silence, watched him disappear into the night like he'd never existed at all. Except he had existed. He was real. And he'd left me standing alone in my apartment, holding my breath, with the mark of his lips on my skin and absolutely no idea what the hell I was supposed to do next. The pounding intensified. I went to the door and opened it, my hand steady, my voice calm. And I lied my beautiful heart out to the men in suits who wanted to know about the man who just walked out of my life. But as they questioned me, as I watched them search my small apartment, I felt it a thread of something silver and luminous connecting me to the darkness he'd disappeared into. A pull, a tether, a bond that shouldn't have existed but did anyway. And somewhere in the night, I was certain Dominic Valero felt it too. 3 days passed like a dream someone was trying to shake themselves awake from. The detectives had released my apartment after 4 hours, finding nothing but my fear and my lies, both of which I'd offered in such abundance they seemed to lose interest. No sign of forced entry, no weapon. No blood on the floor of the diner. I'd cleaned it myself that night, scrubbing the tile with my hands shaking, making sure there was nothing to connect me to Dominic Valero or the violence that had followed him through my door. The diner stayed open. My manager didn't ask questions when I called in sick for one shift, and nobody seemed to notice the exhaustion that had hollowed me out. I moved through my days like a ghost operating a body, serving coffee, refilling water glasses, smiling when I was supposed to smile, all while the thread between me and the darkness grew tighter. I dreamed about him, not the dreaming of sleep, though that was bad enough. The endless loop of watching him collapse, of feeling his weight against me, of the moment his lips touched my forehead like he was branding me, but also the waking dreams, the ones where I'd catch a scent in the air, sandalwood and gunpowder, and my heart would stop, certain he was there. He wasn't, but someone was watching. I felt it first on the second day. The sensation of eyes on the back of my neck as I walked home from the diner at 3 a.m. The way shadows in the alley moved just a second too slow to be natural. By the third day, I was certain of it. Someone was following me, staying just outside my peripheral vision, keeping pace with my footsteps. It should have terrified me. And it did, but underneath the fear was something else. Something that recognized the watching as care, as protection. On the 4th day, he returned. I was sitting in my window seat with a cup of tea that had gone cold an hour ago, my grandmother's necklace heavy in my palm, when the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway because some part of me had been waiting for this call the entire time. "Don't leave your apartment," his voice said without preamble. Low, urgent. "In 5 minutes, you're going to hear sirens, police and ambulance. There's going to be activity in the street. Close your curtains and stay away from the window. Dominic." I said, "Don't leave. I have someone coming to sit outside your building. She'll have a coffee cup from Dante's. You'll know her. She doesn't work there normally, but she'll be visible. If she moves, you let me know. If a car pulls up that I haven't told you about, you run to the second-floor storage closet, and you stay there until—" "Dominic, stop. I don't know you. I don't know who you are or what you're involved in, and I shouldn't be helping you, and I definitely shouldn't be. You saved my life," he interrupted. And there was something raw in his voice, something that sounded like a wound. "That means I don't get a choice anymore. You don't get a choice anymore. This is how it works now. I protect you, and you stay alive. Everything else is negotiable." "That's not—" I started, but the sirens had already begun, distant but getting closer. Red and blue light started painting my apartment in rotating waves of color. "What happened?" "Nothing you need to know about." His voice had gone cold, professional, the voice of someone who'd done this before, who knew exactly how to compartmentalize violence. "Stay inside. Wait for my call." The line went dead. I did what he told me to do, which was infuriating and terrifying, and exactly what I'd known I'd do the moment his voice came through the speaker. I closed the curtains and sat in the near dark, listening to the sirens, watching the light show through the cracks in the fabric, and hating myself for the way my heart was racing with something other than fear. 45 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "She's in position. You're safe." I looked out carefully and saw her. A woman maybe 10 years older than me, red hair, sitting on a bench across the street with a coffee cup and a phone. She was dressed well, but not obviously, just someone waiting for someone, or maybe taking a break. The kind of person your eyes slid right past without catching. She looked up directly at my window and nodded once. My stomach twisted. The woman stayed there until I went to bed. When I woke the next morning, she was gone. But I knew without being told that it meant he'd decided the immediate threat had passed. Not that I was safe, just that the danger was no longer acute. Dominic Valero, whatever he was, clearly distinguished between threatened and murdered, and apparently, I was just below that threshold. That night, unable to sleep, I did something dangerous. I opened my laptop and I searched for his name. What I found made me wish I hadn't. Dominic Valero. 31 years old. Allegedly the head of something called the Valero Organization, which was a polite way of saying he was a mob boss. The articles were careful with their language suspected, allegedly, sources claim, but the subtext was clear. The Valero Organization was responsible for a significant portion of the city's organized crime, and Dominic was their ruthless enforcer, their strategic mind, their heart that didn't beat with mercy. There was a photo from a charity gala 6 months ago. He was in a tuxedo, standing next to an older man who had the same sharp features, presumably his father. His expression was blank, dangerous, the face of someone who could have your knees broken and sleep fine that night. That wasn't the man who'd whispered my name like it was sacred. There were other details. Business takeovers that had gone violent, rivals who'd disappeared, a brother who'd died in what the news called tragic circumstances 3 years ago, a family legacy of crime stretching back 4 generations, and then, buried in a society page from 5 years ago, a single sentence that made the breath catch in my throat. The Valero family was known for their ancestral connection to certain traditions, with sources claiming bloodline ties to significant historical properties and customs. I clicked deeper. Archives, old newspaper mentions, references to something called the Valero Accord, which seemed to involve property deeds from the 1800s, and mentions of binding rituals and moon-marked lineages. None of it made sense. But my grandmother's necklace was burning against my chest like it suddenly knew something I didn't, and the marks she'd given me, those strange symbols tattooed in permanent ink on my ribs, from a ritual I'd been too young to understand, were tingling like they were waking up from a long sleep. My phone rang. "Stop digging," Dominic said without preamble. "I can see your browsing history from the network you're on, and you're asking questions that are going to get you noticed by people who are very, very bad at mercy. How did you have cybersecurity like a sleeping infant. I could watch your entire life through that laptop if I wanted to." There was no judgment in his voice, just statement. "Don't do it again. What you're learning it means becoming a target. I'm already a target, I said. Aren't I? The moment you walked through that diner door, there was a long silence. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, like he was telling me something true despite every training he'd ever had telling him to lie. Yes, he said, but you weren't supposed to be. That's the part I still can't figure out. What do you mean? I mean... He paused, and I could hear the sound of him moving, fabric against skin, the distant hum of traffic. I mean that I shouldn't know you, that the men coming for me shouldn't have any reason to want you dead, that everything about you existing in my world is mathematically impossible. Then explain it to me, I said, and I sounded like I was pleading. Explain what you meant when you said I was the one person you were never supposed to meet. In person, he said finally. Tonight, come outside. Every instinct I had screamed at me to refuse. Every survival mechanism, every ounce of the caution that had kept me alive for 23 years told me that meeting him again was stepping closer to a fire that would consume me entirely. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. There's a car waiting, he said as I descended the stairs. Silver Aston Martin, engine running. Get in. I did. And the moment I closed the door behind me, I felt the thread between us pull tight, snap into focus, become a chain. Everything was about to change. The car smelled like expensive leather and the kind of cleanliness that came from professional detailing. The driver was a woman with cold eyes and a scar that ran from her temple to her jaw, and she said absolutely nothing as I slid into the back seat and saw Dominic for the second time since his world had crashed into mine. He was whole this time, healed, or healing, or just wearing the kind of tailored black suit that made injury look like a lifestyle choice. A small white scar was visible just above his collarbone. Was that from the wound? And his eyes were that terrible gray-green storm color that seemed to have been burned into my retinas permanently. Hi, I said, which was perhaps the worst opening possible. Hi, he echoed, and there was something like a smile at the corner of his mouth. Sad. Knowing. You came, you asked. I didn't think you would. He leaned back in the seat, studying me like I was a puzzle that had developed new pieces. I thought you'd run. Smart people run from me. Maybe I'm not smart. You are. His voice was certain. You're brilliant. That's what terrifies me. The car was moving, driving deeper into the warehouse district, away from the lights and toward the industrial spaces where the city forgot to hide its sins. We didn't talk for a long time. I watched the streets change from familiar to foreign, watched them become narrower and darker, watched the kind of people who occupied them transform from working-class graveyard shifters to something harder and more careful. Where are we going? I finally asked. Somewhere I can tell you the truth without being overheard. He glanced at me, and I caught the moment his composure cracked, just barely. I need you to understand something before we arrive. Once you know certain things, you can't unknow them. You can't go back to your apartment, and your diner, and your small, safe life. You'll be marked by knowledge, by proximity, by the fact that I'm going to trust you with things that could get us both killed. Then don't tell me, I said, surprising myself. Don't put me in that position. Let me go back. Let me be safe. I can't. He reached over and took my hand, his grip careful, his touch gentle enough to be asking instead of taking, because I already tried to keep you in the dark, and it didn't work. The dream started 6 months ago. Your face in my sleep, your voice in rooms where you'd never been, your name being whispered by something inside me that I didn't have a word for. And then you were there, in the diner, real and solid and impossible, and the part of me that's been waiting for you my entire life just knew. That's insane, I whispered. It is. He brought my hand to his chest, and I could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong. It's insane, and it's old, and it's written into bloodlines that go back further than written history. Your grandmother knew. That's why she gave you that necklace. That's why she marked your ribs. That's why you've always felt like you didn't belong to your father's world, no matter how hard he tried to force you into it. Stop. I pulled my hand away. You don't get to know those things. You don't get to know who I am or what my family did or... I know because my father told me. The car was slowing, turning into an underground garage beneath a building I didn't recognize. He called me into his study the night you were born, gave me a name, told me that somewhere in the city, a girl had been born who was going to be mine someday, if fate was cruel enough to allow it. He said that my bloodline and hers were supposed to converge, that it had been written into a binding ritual centuries ago, that we were... He paused, and his jaw tightened. Fated mates. The words hung in the air like poison. That's the most insane thing I've ever heard. I said flatly. Agreed. The car pulled into a parking space, and he shut off the engine. Which is why I didn't tell you immediately. Which is why I've been trying to keep you at arm's length. Which is why I sent my people to watch you instead of coming near you myself. Because knowing you exist is already destroying me, and getting close to you is going to destroy us both. Then don't, I said. Don't get close. Let me go. I can't. He turned to face me fully, and there was something raw and honest in his expression, something that made him look less like a powerful crime boss and more like a man being crushed under the weight of something he couldn't control. Don't you understand? You're not a choice I made. You're something that was written a long time ago in someone else's blood, and I'm supposed to be the one wielding the knife that binds us together. I'm supposed to be the one making the cuts. And are you? I asked, and my voice came out steady. Dangerous. Are you going to cut me, Dominic? Every single day I know you. I want to. He looked away, but I won't. That's my gift to you. My resistance. My rebellion against a fate that decided for both of us. The car door opened, and the scarred driver gestured for us to follow. We were in an underground parking structure, and there was a single elevator. And when Dominic led me inside and pressed the button for the penthouse, I realized I'd made a terrible mistake somewhere. The moment had passed where I could have said no. The moment where I could have left and been just Vera again, small and safe and alone. Now I was Vera with a fated bond tied to a Mafia boss who was trying very hard to want to let me go. The penthouse was all floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, modern furniture in blacks and grays, and the kind of space that belonged to someone who saw beauty as something to own rather than something to feel. He handed me a drink bourbon, neat without asking what I wanted, and stood at the window with his back to me. 3 days after you saved my life, he said quietly, my father died. Heart attack, or so they're saying. The men who took him down were going to come for me next, to consolidate power. I was bleeding out in your diner because I was running from my own family. From my brother, who decided he wanted the empire more than he wanted blood loyalty. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. Don't be. He turned around, and there was a strange flatness in his eyes. My father was a monster, and my brother is a coward, and I got everything he wanted because I was willing to do the things he wasn't. I won the war because I was better at violence than he was, and now I'm supposed to lead an organization of people who will tear me apart the moment they sense weakness. So you need me, I said, understanding suddenly. That's what this is. I'm an asset. A way to prove you have the loyalty of another family. No. He moved toward me, and I could smell him again, that intoxicating blend of dangerous and clean. I need you like I need oxygen. I need you like I need my heart to keep beating, but yes, I'm also going to use you. Because that's what I do. I use everything and everyone, and I'm good at it. And that's why I told you that getting close to me is going to destroy you. Then why did you bring me here? Because I'm selfish, he said simply. And because I want to touch you, more than I want to keep you safe. And because every second you're not in this building, I can feel it like something's being torn out of my chest. The binding ritual doesn't care about morality, Vera. It doesn't care about your safety or my sanity, or the fact that we're going to burn everything down just by existing near each other. He kissed me then, and it was like nothing I'd ever experienced. Tender and violent at once, like he was trying to absorb me into himself, like his lips could forge the bond that destiny had written. I made a sound against his mouth. Surrender, maybe, or protest, and he pulled back like I'd burned him. I need you to understand, he said, his breathing ragged. The moment you say yes to this, to me, there's no going back. You become a Valero, and that means you become a target, and it means you become someone capable of violence, and it means you become mine in ways that go deeper than marriage or love or anything else. You understand that? No, I said, but I'm starting to. And that's when his phone buzzed, and he read the message, and his entire body went rigid. What? I asked. My brother, he said, and his voice was the cold one now. The one that belonged to the Mafia boss. He's made his move. He's taken someone. He's given me 12 hours to surrender the empire. Or he's going to kill them in ways that will make my father's death look merciful. Who? I whispered. His eyes met mine, and I saw the answer before he spoke it. Someone from your family, he said. Your sister. He has your sister. I didn't have a sister. That was my first thought, which was stupid and irrelevant, and exactly how I knew that Dominic was telling the truth. I had a half-sister, technically. My father's daughter from his second marriage, Someone I'd met maybe 3 times in my life. Someone I'd never known and couldn't pretend to care about. Her name was Margot, and she was 17, and now she was a hostage in a war I didn't understand. "We have to call the police," I said immediately. "We don't." Dominic was already moving, already pulling on a jacket, already becoming something other than the man who'd just kissed me. Involving law enforcement means my brother gets nervous, and when he gets nervous, hostages die. We handle this internally. How? How do you handle having a 17-year-old girl's life in your hands? "We find her," he said simply. "We burn through every contact I have, every resource, every favor owed. We find her and we extract her, and we convince my brother that killing her would be a bigger mistake than he's already made." His phone was buzzing constantly now, messages coming in rapid succession. He ignored most of them, responding to a few with single words: confirmed, moving, ready. The world was reshaping itself in real time, and I was watching it happen from the outside, a civilian caught in machinery designed for violence. "What about my father?" I asked. "Does he know?" "Not yet." Dominic was accessing something on a holographic display that shouldn't exist, running his fingers through the air and pulling up maps, photographs, surveillance feeds. "Your father is a politician with mob connections. He's not equipped for this level of direct threat. And if my brother knows that your father knows, he becomes more dangerous. So you're lying to him." "I'm protecting him by keeping him ignorant." Dominic looked at me. "The same way I've been trying to lie to myself about you." The scarred woman from the car appeared with 2 other operatives, both men, both carrying the weight of violence the way other people carried briefcases. They didn't speak to me, didn't acknowledge me except with their eyes calculating, assessing, determining whether I was a liability or an asset. "She stays," Dominic told them. "She's a liability," the scarred woman said. Her voice was gravelly, like gravel being crushed under tires. "She's untrained, unprepared, and emotionally compromised. She stays," Dominic repeated. And there was no room for negotiation in his tone. I watched them work. Watched the criminal infrastructure that had once seemed abstract and distant suddenly become real and operational. Maps were deployed, contacts were called, safe houses were identified. Dominic's brother, whose name was Salvatore, and who apparently spent most of his time at a private club in the financial district, was being tracked in real time by people who moved like ghosts. "Your brother," I said, pulling Dominic aside. "What's he like?" "He's like me, except without the part that wants to protect things." Dominic's expression was unreadable. "He's smarter in some ways, more brutal in others. He's been planning this for years, waiting for our father to die, waiting for a moment when I'd be weak, and I've been fighting a war on 2 fronts, while my own bloodline turned itself into a weapon." "Is he—" I hesitated. "Is he like you and me? Is he fated to someone?" Something flickered across Dominic's face. "He was supposed to be. There was a girl, years ago. But he rejected the bond. Too weak," he said. "Too limiting. He decided he didn't want a fated mate, so he killed her instead." The words hung in the air between us. "Oh my God," I whispered. "This is what my world is, Vera." He took my shoulders, and his grip was gentle but irresistible. "This is what you're agreeing to. This is the violence and the darkness, and the blood that comes with being tied to me. My brother would have killed you already if he'd known about the bond. That's the only reason you've survived this long. He didn't know we'd finally met." "But he does now," I said. "Yes." Dominic pulled me against his chest. "Which means we have approximately 12 hours before this changes everything." The next 6 hours were a blur of surveillance and preparation. Dominic was in constant communication with his network, coordinating with people who had names but no faces, making decisions that would result in violence. He was brilliant and terrible at it, the kind of ruthless that came from growing up knowing you were supposed to inherit an empire. Around 10 p.m., as darkness was settling over the city like a blanket made of shadows, his brother made contact. The call came through on a secure line, and Dominic put it on speaker. "Hello, little brother." Salvatore's voice was polished and cultured and somehow more dangerous than Dominic's gravel. "I was wondering when you'd finally get the message. You look worse than I expected. The diner girl did quite a number on you." My blood went cold. "You know about her," Dominic said, and there was nothing in his tone at all. "Of course I do. What kind of detective would I be if I didn't notice my brother suddenly developing a humanitarian interest in bleeding out in grimy diners?" Salvatore laughed, and it sounded like breaking glass. "The real question is whether you're willing to give up an empire for one pretty little nobody with a fate-marked bloodline. Because that's what this is. isn't it? She's the one, the great balancing act, the fated mate you were never supposed to meet. I'm going to kill you, Dominic said pleasantly. Maybe, but not before I kill her. The line went silent for a moment. Oh, not the one in the storage facility. The one I have there is just leverage. I'm talking about the pretty waitress. You're Vera. I have her address. I have her schedule. I have 3 men positioned within 2 blocks of her diner, and all I have to do is make one phone call, and she becomes just another unsolved murder in a city full of them. Or... He paused. You surrender. You sign over the empire. You become nothing. And she lives. Everybody wins. That's not how this works, Dominic said. No? How does it work then? Dominic looked at me, and I saw the moment he made the choice. It doesn't, he said, and hung up. The line went dead. What do you mean it doesn't work? I demanded. He's going to kill me. He's going to try, Dominic corrected. Which is why you're getting on a plane in 20 minutes. My people are preparing a safe house upstate. You go there, you stay there. You don't contact anyone until I tell you it's safe. Absolutely not. I stepped away from him. I'm not running. You are. No. If I run, it validates what he said. It makes me the leverage. It makes this work. As long as I'm willing to stay, as long as I'm willing to stand next to you, he has nothing. He has your life, Dominic said. And there was desperation in his voice now. The kind that came from someone who was being asked to choose between love and survival. Yes, I said. But I get to choose to lose it. That's what makes the difference. I took his hands. And I felt it then, the binding ritual, the ancestral magic, the blood-deep certainty that I was supposed to be here. That this was written into my bones the moment I was born. I'm staying, I said. Whatever happens next, I'm staying. The scarred woman cleared her throat. 2 of his men just entered the warehouse district. They're moving toward the diner. Everything happened at once. The club where Salvatore was hiding was called the Obsidian. And it was the kind of place that didn't exist on any city records. Built into the basement of a condemned warehouse, protected by men with the kind of scars that came from long wars. It was simultaneously the most dangerous and the most arrogant thing I'd ever seen. Come find me, it seemed to say. I dare you. Dominic's plan was simple and complicated in the way that military operations tend to be. Distraction on multiple fronts. His men were moving toward the diner where I was supposed to be, engaging with Salvatore's operatives in ways that would keep their attention split. Meanwhile, a smaller team was infiltrating the club's back entrance, moving through the old tunnel system that connected most of the warehouse district's older buildings. And I was in the car again, moving through the city with Dominic, and the scarred woman whose name I finally learned was Rhea, toward a confrontation that was going to rewrite the balance of power in his entire organization. There are things I need to tell you, Dominic said quietly as we drove. Things about the binding ritual. Things about what's going to happen if you stay with me. Okay, I said. The ritual dates back to the 1800s. My family and yours made an agreement, a blood pact, essentially. They needed to prevent a curse that was bleeding their family line dry. My family had the power to create a binding, a way to tie 2 bloodlines together through a mate bond that would transfer protection through bloodline magic. Your grandmother was one of the architects of it. So was my great-great-grandfather. My grandmother never told me that. She couldn't. He was watching the city pass outside the window. The knowledge was supposed to be passed from grandmother to granddaughter on your deathbed. She tried. That night when she gave you the necklace. But your father had already done so much damage by then, trying to beat the magic out of you, that her message didn't land. The necklace was the backup, a magical anchor. It was supposed to call to me eventually, across distance and time and probability, and it did. Yes. He looked at me. That's why I knew your name. That's why I've been dreaming about you. The magic has been working the entire time, preparing us for each other. And when I came through that diner door dying, it amplified everything. The proximity, the vulnerability, the fact that you chose to save me instead of run, all of it was the ritual finishing what it started 200 years ago. So I didn't have a choice, I said. About saving you. About any of this. You had a choice, he corrected. You always have a choice. But the choice came with weight, with inevitability, with the pull of something ancient and powerful. That's not the same as not having a choice. That's just having a choice that costs more than most people are willing to pay. We pulled up to a service entrance, and Rhea took us down into the underground. The tunnel system was vast and intricate, clearly centuries old, And as we moved through it, I started to see the symbols. My symbols. The ones tattooed on my ribs. They were carved into the stone walls, painted in what looked like old blood, repeated in patterns that suggested ritual and power, and something that had survived centuries. Your family owned these tunnels, Dominic said as we walked. They used them to move through the city during the famine times, during the wars. They were protective spaces, spelled and sealed. Your bloodline was meant to be the guardian of the city's underground, the keeper of the old ways. That role passed to my family when your line scattered, but it was always supposed to be shared. That's what the binding ritual was for, to unite the guardians. We emerged into a corridor lined with doors. Behind one of them, I could hear voices. Salvatore's operatives, Dominic's team. A moment before the violence. "Listen to me," Dominic said, gripping my face gently. "Whatever happens next, whatever you see or hear, I need you to know that you were right to come here. The binding is real. The magic is real. And I would have eventually burned the entire world down looking for you if you hadn't saved me that night." He kissed me then, and it felt like goodbye. Then he was moving, and Ria was pulling me toward a safe position, and the violence was beginning. It wasn't like anything I'd ever witnessed. Dominic moved like water, efficient and brutal, and his team moved with him like they'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. Salvatore's men tried to hold the corridor, but they were overwhelmed in seconds. And then Dominic was through the doors and into the main club, and everything went quiet. I couldn't see what happened next. Ria had me pinned in a protective position, her body shielding mine, her hand on a weapon. But I could hear voices, Dominic's and someone else's, someone who sounded so much like him it was like listening to a mirror. "You're going to die tonight," Salvatore was saying. "The Empire dies with you. I'll burn it all down before I let you keep it." "You can't burn what's already burning," Dominic replied. "You never understood that. You were always trying to own things, control them. I learned a long time ago that power is just fire. The trick isn't to contain it. The trick is to burn hotter than everyone else." There was a gunshot. Then another. Then silence. Ria's grip on me didn't loosen. "Status," she said into her comm. The response came back calm. "Target is down. Hostage is secured. Moving to extraction." Dominic appeared in the doorway a moment later. There was blood on his shirt, and his left arm was hanging at an angle that suggested it was dislocated, but his eyes were clear, focused, alive in a way that went deeper than just breathing. "It's done," he said. We moved through the tunnels in reverse, back toward the surface, back toward the city that had almost become our grave. The scarred woman Ria was talking constantly on her comm, coordinating with teams, managing the fallout, making calls that would determine how the organization responded to the change in leadership. Salvatore was dead. The coup was over, and somehow, impossibly, I was still alive. Back in the car, with Dominic in the back seat trying not to show how much pain he was in, I asked the question that had been building in my chest like a second heartbeat. "The binding ritual," I said, "the one you mentioned. Is it done?" He looked at me, and there was something ancient in his eyes. Something that went deeper than just Dominic. Something that was speaking through him from centuries back. "Not yet," he said, "but it's starting. You feel it, don't you? The way the world is shifting, the way certain things are becoming clearer. That's the magic waking up inside you. Your bloodline is remembering what it was meant to be." "What am I meant to be?" "Mine," he said simply. "A guardian, a partner, someone tied to me through blood and ritual and the deepest kind of magic, but also yourself, more yourself than you've ever been. The ritual doesn't erase you, Vera, it completes you." As he spoke, I felt it. A sensation, like something inside me was opening, like doors that had been sealed my entire life were swinging wide. The symbols on my ribs weren't burning anymore, they were singing, and somewhere in the darkness of the city, I felt the responding pull of his own bloodline magic reaching out to meet mine. It should have terrified me. Maybe it did, but it also felt like coming home. My sister Margot was traumatized but alive. She was 17 years old and had spent 6 hours in a locked room believing she was going to die. And when I finally saw her at the safe house Dominic had prepared, she looked at me with eyes that had aged years in a single night. She didn't ask me to explain what was happening, or why her half-sister had showed up with a Mafia boss who was clearly important enough to command armies. She just collapsed against me and cried, and I held her, and we didn't talk about anything that mattered. The first 3 days after Salvatore's death were chaos. Dominic was managing the fallout, consolidating power, making sure that the men who'd been loyal to his brother understood that loyalty had been redistributed. There were meetings that lasted until dawn. There were phone calls with people in government. There was blood on his hands, sometimes literally, sometimes figuratively, and each time he came back to the safe house, he looked a little more like the person he was supposed to be, and a little less like the man who'd whispered my name like a prayer. On the 4th day, my father found me. He didn't come to the safe house. Instead, he had me brought to his office, which was on the 42nd floor of a building downtown that still smelled like old money and older power. I went because he asked me to, because the command came through Dominic, because at some point I'd stopped being the person who got to make their own choices and started being the person who existed in someone else's war. "You look different," my father said when I arrived. He was a handsome man in the way that powerful men often are, all sharp angles and cold eyes, and he was regarding me like I was a particularly interesting business acquisition. "The Valero boy has changed you." "I haven't been with him in 4 days," I said. "Doesn't matter." He gestured for me to sit, and I did, because the illusion of choice was sometimes all that mattered. "The binding is visible if you know what to look for. There's something in your energy that's different now. Something that marks you as his. How do you know?" He smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. "Because my mother explained the ritual to me on her deathbed, Vera. Because I've known my entire life that if you ever met a Valero, you'd be lost to me. Because I spent 23 years trying to beat the magic out of you, and apparently it didn't work." The room suddenly felt very small. "What did you do to me?" I asked quietly. "I tried to save you." He leaned back in his chair. "When your grandmother died and I realized what the binding meant, what it would cost you to be tied to a criminal organization, I tried everything. I had priests come to the house. I had so-called experts look at those symbols on your ribs. I pushed you toward normal, toward safety, toward anything that would keep you from becoming entangled with people like the Valeros. And then you walked into a diner one night and managed to save the heir to the most powerful criminal empire in the city. It wasn't planned." "No," he agreed, "but fate is like that. It doesn't care about your plans. It just waits for the moment when you're not paying attention, and then it devours you whole." He pulled out a leather journal and slid it across the desk. "This belonged to your grandmother. It's the true history of your bloodline. It explains the ritual, the magic, the cost of the binding, and it explains what you're supposed to become if you complete it." I didn't open it. I didn't need to. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you're going to complete the binding whether I allow it or not," he said. "And I'd rather you do it with knowledge than with ignorance. Knowledge won't protect you, but it might help you survive." "Survive what?" "The second stage." He stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city like he could see the strings that held it together. "The binding ritual has 2 stages. The first stage is awakening, which is already happening. The second stage is completion, and it requires more than just love or proximity. It requires a sacrifice. Blood sacrifice, ideally. A choice made freely, a price paid willingly. Your grandmother knew this. Your grandmother hoped you'd never have to pay it." The room was spinning. "What kind of sacrifice?" I asked. "That varies," my father said. "The ritual is old enough that it adapts to the bloodline it's working with. For your grandmother's generation, it required the death of her firstborn to cement the binding. For others, it's been different. It could be years of life. It could be the ability to have children. It could be magic itself, burned out of you forever." "That's insane." "Yes," he looked at me. "But it's also unavoidable if you're tied to a Valero. The price always comes due." I took the journal and left. I didn't say goodbye to my father. I didn't acknowledge the weight of what he'd told me. I just walked back to the car where Ria was waiting and told her to take me to Dominic. He was at the penthouse again, the one overlooking the city, and he took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked. "My father told me about the second stage of the binding." I held out the journal. "He told me it requires a sacrifice, that something has to be given up, that the ritual isn't finished until a price is paid." Dominic took the journal but didn't open it. His expression went very still, very controlled. The expression of a man who had just been reminded of something he'd been trying to forget. "He's right," Dominic said quietly. "You knew?" The betrayal was sharp enough to cut. "You knew there was a price, and you didn't tell me?" "I knew there was a theoretical price. I didn't know what it would be for us." He opened the journal anyway, and I watched him read through his family's version of the ritual. His jaw tightened. His breathing became shallow. "According to this, the The price for a Valero binding is the life of the one who creates the binding. I didn't understand for a moment. And then I did. The head of the family, I whispered. You. Essentially, yes. He closed the journal. When the binding reaches completion, when the ritual fully awakens, the magic requires a transfer of power. The current head of the family offers themselves as a conduit for the magic to flow through. It's supposed to be transformative. It's supposed to leave you stronger. It's supposed to be evolution. It's supposed to kill you, I said. Probably, he agreed. My father knew this when he arranged the ritual centuries ago. He paid the price. That's why the Valero line is so powerful, because every generation, the head of the family dies to renew the binding. But I thought. He looked at me, and there was desperation in his eyes. I thought maybe, with you, it could be different. I thought maybe we could refuse the binding. Maybe we could be the generation that broke the cycle. But we can't, I said. No. He took my hands. The magic is too strong. The pull is too deep. The moment we completed the first stage, the moment you saved my life, and I claimed you as mine, the second stage became inevitable. We're not going to be able to stop it. How long? I asked. A week, maybe 2. The journal says the signs will be unmistakable when it's about to happen. I pulled away from him and walked to the window. The city was spread out below us like a conquered thing, and I thought about the weight of it, the blood that had been spilled to keep it running, the endless cycle of violence and power that Dominic had inherited, and that I was being asked to help sustain. I can't do this, I said. I can't accept a binding that kills you. I can't be responsible for your death. You're not, he said. The binding is responsible. The magic is responsible. I'm responsible, because I knew what this was, and I didn't want to let you go. Then refuse it. I turned back to him. We both refuse. We reject the binding. We choose something else. There is nothing else. His voice was gentle, which somehow made it worse. This is the choice we have, Vera. This is the only choice we've ever had. We complete the binding and I transform and you become the guardian you were meant to be. Or we reject it and spend the rest of our lives torn apart from the inside by magic that has no other outlet. Both of us slowly dying, slowly burning, slowly destroying everything we touch. That's not a choice, I said. That's a death sentence either way. Yes, Dominic said, but one of them involves having you. And I'd accept that death 1,000 times over if it meant one day with you. He pulled me against him, and I let myself collapse into his embrace. And for the first time since this had all begun, I cried. Not for the fear, though there was plenty of that. Not for the impossibility, though that was crushing. But for the terrible, aching unfairness of being given the one thing you're supposed to want, and finding out that having it was going to destroy the person you wanted it with. We didn't leave the penthouse that night. We didn't talk about the binding or the magic or the approaching deadline. We just held each other, and I felt the weight of it, the absolute, irrevocable weight of a love that was written in blood and ritual and the bones of the earth itself. And somewhere in my chest, the symbols on my ribs began to glow. The signs began on day 5. Small things at first. The lights in the penthouse would flicker when Dominic's emotions spiked. Objects would shift a few centimeters on tables without being touched. The temperature would fluctuate wildly, cold enough to frost the windows one moment and warm enough to fog them the next. But more than that, I could feel it. The binding was waking up inside me like a second circulatory system, like a second heartbeat that echoed Dominic's. When he was in the room, my skin tingled. When he was near, I could sense the borders of his body like they were marked in starlight. When he wasn't there was an ache that lived behind my ribs and whispered his name. On day 6, my father called. The second stage is beginning, he said without preamble. The journal warned that once it started, it would accelerate. You have maybe 48 hours before the magic demands completion. What will happen? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. The binding will create a convergence point, a moment when both bloodlines are balanced perfectly, when the magic is at its peak, and at that moment, the head of the family, Dominic, will be asked to complete the transformation. He'll offer his life to the magic, and the magic will remold him. Most of the time, the person emerges stronger, changed. But the transformation itself... My father paused. The transformation itself is agony. It's death and rebirth at the same moment. I can't watch him go through that, I said. You won't have to. My father's voice was gentle, almost kind. When the convergence happens, When the magic peaks, your part of the ritual will activate. You'll feel it pull you under, and you'll go. You and Dominic will be alone in the magic space for however long the transformation takes. It will be just you and him and the old gods who authored the ritual in the first place. I hung up, and I didn't tell Dominic. What was there to tell? That death was coming? He already knew. That it would hurt? He'd accepted that. That I couldn't bear it? That was my problem to carry alone. On day 7, everything changed. We were in the penthouse, and Dominic was on the phone managing something that involved territorial disputes and loyalty confirmations, and I was trying to read my grandmother's journal and understand what was about to happen. The symbols on my ribs were glowing constantly now, patterns of light that mapped across my skin like a living constellation. The windows exploded, not broke, exploded. The glass didn't shatter in the normal way, it simply ceased to exist, transforming into something else, something that looked like crystallized light. The city beyond was suddenly much closer, much more real, and I could see every light, every street, every movement happening in the night. Dominic dropped his phone. "It's starting," he said, and his voice sounded strange, like it was coming from underground, like it was echoing off the walls of a place that didn't exist in normal space. The floor beneath our feet began to shift, not violently, but deliberately, like something was rearranging the building's internal structure. Walls became transparent. The sky inside the penthouse turned not dark but luminescent, like we were standing inside a moment that was neither day nor night but something in between. And that's when I felt it. The pull. The binding opening up like a flower made of magic and hunger, and something that recognized me as its own. "Come here," Dominic said, and I was moving before my conscious mind could catch up. Moving toward him. Moving toward the convergence. Moving toward whatever came next. He pulled me close, and I could feel his heartbeat accelerating. Could feel the fear in him, because even though he'd accepted this, even though he'd known it was coming, actually experiencing it was different from theoretical knowledge. He was going to die, and I was going to watch it, and there was no amount of acceptance that could change what that would cost. The magic wrapped around us like silk made of starlight. "I love you," he said. "I need you to know that. I love you, and I'm sorry for pulling you into this. And I would do it again in a heartbeat because everything is worth knowing you, Dominic." But the world was already coming apart. The penthouse dissolved. The city dissolved. Everything that was solid and real and comprehensible became liquid, became malleable, became something that existed outside the normal laws of physics and gravity and time. We were falling and rising simultaneously, and the binding was all around us. Inside us, a luminous network of magic that connected us to the city, to the earth, to bloodlines that stretched back centuries. And then we were somewhere else. Not somewhere, somewhen. I was seeing fragments of time. The ritual being performed in 1847, in a room lit by candlelight, with robed figures drawing symbols with blood on a stone floor. My great-great-grandmother and Dominic's great-great-grandfather, making the bargain, sealing it, understanding the price it would cost. Then the scene shifted. 1902. Another binding, another sacrifice. I watched a man who had Dominic's eyes step into the magic and offer himself to it, and I felt the agony of his transformation like it was happening to me. The way his body was unmade and remade, the way he emerged changed, stronger, yes, but also scarred, marked by the magic in ways that went deeper than skin. Then again. 1947. Same ritual, same sacrifice, same terrible, beautiful transformation. And now it was Dominic's turn. "I'm scared," he whispered, and we were back in our moment, in our space outside time, the binding swirling around us like water made of light. "I know," I said. "I'm scared too. Promise me," he said. "Promise me that if I don't survive this, if the magic takes me and doesn't bring me back, that you'll finish what I started. You'll lead the family. You'll protect the city. You'll keep the balance." "No," I said. "No, I won't. Because you're going to survive this. You're going to come through it, and you're going to be here with me, and we're going to figure out what comes next. Vera, no." I took his face in my hands, and I could feel the binding responding to my touch, amplifying, preparing. "You don't get to leave me. You don't get to noble sacrifice your way out of this. You're going to fight for your life the same way you fought for your empire. You're going to hold on to me, and to this, and to whatever comes next, and you're going to survive. Do you understand?" His eyes locked with mine, and I saw the moment he chose. chose life, chose me, chose a future, instead of a noble death. Okay, he said, and then the magic hit. It wasn't gradual. It was like every star in existence suddenly exploded at once, like the entire weight of the binding suddenly had nowhere else to go but through us. Through him, through his body and his blood and his bones. He screamed, and I held him, and I felt something break inside me as I watched him burn. The agony lasted for hours or seconds time, had no meaning in the space where we existed. I held Dominic through it while the magic rewove him, piece by piece, into something new. His body heated like fever, like sun, like something that was burning away every weakness and replacing it with something stronger. And somewhere in that crucible of pain and transformation, the final piece of the binding activated. I felt it like a door opening inside my chest. Felt the threads of magic that connected us suddenly become visible, luminous, real enough to touch. The symbols on my ribs flared with light bright enough to blind. And I screamed because the magic was remaking me too, not destroying and rebuilding like it was doing to Dominic, but awakening, waking up the guardian bloodline that had slept in my veins for 23 years. I could see differently, could sense the city below us with the clarity of someone who'd always been meant to watch over it, could feel the ancient power that ran through the tunnels, the wards that my ancestors had placed, the invisible network that had been waiting for me to reclaim it. And I could feel Dominic changing, could sense the exact moment when the old Dominic finished burning away and something new emerged in his place. When the light finally faded, when the magic finally released us, we were on our knees on the penthouse floor. The windows were still gone, still transformed into that crystallized light. The night air was cold against our skin. Dominic was breathing. His heartbeat was steady. His eyes were still the same gray-green, but there was something different in them now. Something older. Something that had been forged in magic and pain. "Are you?" I started to ask. "I'm okay," he said, and his voice was the same but also different. It resonated in a way it hadn't before, carrying weight and power and truth. "I'm more than okay. I can feel the binding. I can feel you through it. It's like..." He looked at his hands like they belonged to someone else, like I've been moving through the world only half awake, and now I finally understand what it means to be alive. He pulled me against him, and I could feel the difference in his strength. The magic had made him something more than human, something that existed partially in the normal world and partially in the magic space where the binding lived. He was dangerous now in ways he hadn't been before. Powerful. Lethal. But underneath all of that was still Dominic, still the man who had whispered my name like a prayer, who had sacrificed everything for a power that would finally let him protect me, who had chosen life instead of noble death because I asked him to. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we figure out what a Valero and a Guardian are supposed to do when they're finally bonded." He pulled back just enough to look at me. "We rebuild. We consolidate power. We make sure that no one ever uses the organization against us again. And we try to find something like happiness in all of this darkness." "That's a lot," I said. "It is." He kissed my forehead, my cheeks, my mouth. "But you're not alone anymore. Neither am I. The binding has made us part of each other in ways that go deeper than love or loyalty. You're me, and I'm you. We're one network now, one force. We can't be separated without burning." We stayed on the floor until dawn, holding each other while the city woke up around us, while Rhea arrived with coffee and accepted the change in Dominic with nothing but a nod, while the penthouse slowly returned to normal as the binding settled into place. By the time the sun was fully up, we were making plans. The Empire would continue, but it would be different, less violent, more strategic. Dominic would use his connection to the magic to strengthen his position, to communicate with the network of families that had been bound through similar rituals over the centuries. And I would be introduced as his partner, not his weakness, not his liability, but his equal. "There's one more thing," Dominic said as we prepared to leave the penthouse and face the organization that was waiting for us to announce the binding's completion. "Your father, he's going to try to use you as leverage." "I know," I said, "but the binding won't let him. I can feel it. I'm protected now. We're protected. Yes." He took my hand, and the symbols on my ribs glowed softly in response. "But we should still be careful. Your father is smart and desperate, and that's a dangerous combination." We walked to the elevator together, and as we descended toward the floors below, toward the men who would swear loyalty to us, toward the empire that was now mine as much as his, I felt it, the weight of what we'd become, the responsibility, the power, and underneath all of that, something that felt like peace. The binding ceremony, when word spread, would change the landscape of organized crime in the city. It would solidify Dominic's position, would strengthen the Valero Empire beyond what it had been under his father and brother, and it would make me something I'd never been before, a person with power, a person with purpose. But more than that, it would make me a person who was loved, desperately, irrevocably, bound by ancient magic, loved. And that, I was beginning to understand, was the real power. The challenge came 3 days after the binding was announced. It came from the Constantine family, one of the old dynasties that had considered themselves equal to the Valeros for decades. The message was delivered by one of their emissaries, a woman with iron in her spine, and the kind of confidence that came from representing an empire that had stood for 150 years. The Constantine family contests the legitimacy of the Valero succession, she said, standing in Dominic's study while I sat across from him. My presence a statement in itself. If the new head of the family wishes to maintain his position, he must submit to the trial of succession. 3 tests of power, 3 tests of will, conducted at the old grounds beneath the cathedral. And if I refuse? Dominic asked pleasantly. Then the Constantine family will press their claim to the Valero territory, and your organization will find itself at war with a family that is older, stronger, and infinitely less merciful. I felt the moment Dominic considered rejecting the challenge, felt it through the binding, that momentary flicker of calculation. We could refuse. We could consolidate our strength and prepare for war. We could burn the Constantine family out of the city if we had to. But we both knew that refusing would undermine everything we'd just established. It would make us look weak. It would give the other families, the smaller ones, the ones watching to see if the Valeros were still the force to be reckoned with, reason to doubt. We accept, I said. Both Dominic and the emissary turned to look at me. The trial, I continued, will be conducted with the full participation of both myself and Dominic. That's the way the ritual works. Dual power. Dual responsibility. The emissary smiled, and it wasn't a kind expression. The guardian chooses to participate. How ambitious. I'm certain the Constantine family will find that interesting. She left, and then it was just us. You shouldn't have done that, Dominic said quietly. This is going to be dangerous. The trials are designed to test the absolute limits of power and will. I know, I said, and you shouldn't have to face it alone. We're bound now. We're partners. This is what that means. The next 2 days were preparation. Dominic trained with Rhea, pushing his new magic through every variation and permutation he could imagine. And I studied with an old woman named Esther, who had been a guardian in her own right, decades ago, before she'd passed the responsibility to my family. Your power is different from a Valero's, Esther told me as we stood in one of the old tunnels, my hands glowing with the pure magic of guardianship. Theirs is about dominance, about projection, about making the world bend to their will. Yours is about stability, about protection, about maintaining the balance. In the trials, that will be your strength. Don't try to be a Valero. Be what you are. On the 3rd night, we went to the cathedral. The old grounds beneath it were vast, older than the cathedral itself, older than the city. The trials were being conducted in a chamber that was lit with torches and marked with symbols that stretched back centuries. The Constantine family was there, representing their claim. The smaller families were there, watching, and standing in the center of the chamber were 3 doors, each one sealed with magic. The first trial tests the limits of your personal power, the Constantine matriarch announced. She was an older woman with scars that suggested she'd lived through more wars than most soldiers. You must move through the door, survive what waits inside, and emerge on the other side. If you fail, you burn. Dominic stepped forward first. The door opened like it had been waiting for him, and he disappeared into a space that shouldn't have existed. I couldn't see what was happening inside, but I could feel it through the binding, could feel him pushing against something vast and ancient, and intent on destruction. I held my breath and didn't break contact with the magical thread that tied us together. When he emerged, he was bleeding. Not badly, but enough that I could see the wounds on his arms and chest where something had clawed him, something that existed only in magic, that couldn't be fought with weapons, only with will. I'm okay, he said when he saw the fear on my face. Then it was my turn. The door I passed through opened into something completely different. It wasn't a space designed to test combat or strength. It was a space designed to test resolve. I found myself standing in a room made of memories, my childhood with my father, the violence he'd inflicted trying to beat the magic out of me, the loneliness of knowing I didn't belong anywhere. The magic of the trial was trying to convince me to give up, to walk away, to choose peace over the binding. But I could feel Dominic's presence through the bond, could feel him waiting for me on the other side. I walked through it all without breaking, walked through the pain and the fear and the loneliness until I found the exit. When I emerged, there was blood on my hands. Not physical blood, but magical wounds. The trial had marked me, tested me, found me worthy, and I'd survived. The second trial, the Constantine matriarch announced, tests your willingness to sacrifice for the person you're bound to. This trial was different. It required us to stand opposite each other while the magic tried to force us apart, tried to break the binding, tried to convince us that separation was the only way either of us would survive. The pain was exquisite. Like every nerve in my body was screaming to let him go. Like the magic was whispering that love was the weakness that would destroy us both. But I looked at him, and he looked at me, and we both held on. The binding snapped back into place, stronger than before, more resolved, more absolute. The third trial, the Constantine matriarch said, and there was a note of respect in her voice now, tests your willingness to claim your power completely, to stop denying what you are, to stop holding back. The last door opened, and this time, we went through together. Inside, we found ourselves in a space that mirrored the city. All of it. Every street, every building, every person. And the magic was asking us, do you want this? Do you want the responsibility of protecting it? Do you want the weight of power? For the first time, I didn't hesitate. Yes. Dominic's answer came immediately after. Yes. We felt it then, the moment when the city recognized us. When the wards that had been dormant for so long suddenly awakened and aligned themselves with our will. When every magical thread that ran beneath the city started answering to us. We didn't just inherit the power, we merged with it, became part of its structure. When we emerged from the final door, we were changed again, deeper, more connected to the world around us. The Constantine matriarch bowed. The trial is complete, she announced to the gathered families. The Valero line continues. The binding is legitimate, and the guardian bloodline has been reclaimed. As we left the chamber, walking hand in hand, I realized that this was the real binding. Not the pain or the magic or the sacrifice, but the moment when we chose each other completely. The moment when we stopped running from fate and embraced it instead. 6 months later, I stood in the penthouse overlooking the city and tried to reconcile the woman I was with, the woman I had been. The diner was gone, closed by a fire that was definitely not accidental. I'd left that life behind completely, stepping into the world of the Valero organization without looking back. Dominic had offered to let me walk away 100 times, but each time, I'd chosen to stay, chosen the responsibility, chosen him. The apartment on the 3rd floor of a warehouse building that had housed a waitress with dreams of escape no longer existed. Instead, I had a penthouse that was mine, a position of power that was legitimate, a role in the family that was respected and feared in equal measure. And I had Dominic. He was in the study, conducting business. The empire had transformed under his leadership. Less overt violence, more strategic maneuvering. The binding had made him more human, strangely, more willing to negotiate instead of destroy. The magic had given him something he'd never had before, the ability to trust completely, because the binding meant betrayal would be felt by both of us. My father had tried, briefly, to leverage my position for political gain, but the binding protected me in ways that meant his manipulation simply didn't work anymore. I was tied to something older and more powerful than his ambition. I felt sorry for him. In a distant way, he'd spent his entire life trying to protect me from this world, and in the end, he'd only ensured that I would have to enter it without preparation. Margot, my half-sister, had been sent to a prestigious boarding school on the East Coast. She'd been traumatized by her kidnapping, but she was healing, and she'd asked me, before she left, if the stories about me were true. If I was really bound to a Mafia boss through ancient magic. Yes, I'd told her. But it's not like the stories. It's messier, it's harder, but it's also more beautiful than anything else I've ever experienced. She'd wanted to know if there was a binding waiting for her too. I'd told her the truth. Maybe, if she was lucky, if she let herself recognize it when it appeared. Tonight, Dominic had something special planned. He'd been secretive about it all week, which was unusual for someone who could feel every emotion that ran through my body. But the binding let us keep secrets from each other if we chose to. It let us have the illusion of surprise. He emerged from the study as the sun was setting, painting the city in shades of amber and rose. He was dressed formally, a suit that probably cost more than I'd made in a year at the diner, and there was something in his expression that made my heart skip. "Come with me," he said, taking my hand. He led me down to the garage and into a car that was somehow both familiar and new. We drove through the city, toward the outskirts, toward a place I'd always wanted to go. "Where are we?" I started. "Surprise," he said, and there was that smile again, the one that only ever appeared when we were alone, the vulnerable one. We pulled up to a property that was listed as abandoned. But the moment we stepped through the gates, I felt it, the magic. Old magic, protective magic, waiting magic. "What is this?" I asked. "It's a safe house," Dominic said. "But more than that, it's ours. A place where the binding doesn't have to be public. Where we can be just Dominic and Vera, instead of the crime boss and the guardian." It was beautiful. An old mansion, Victorian and sprawling, set back from the road with enough space to disappear into the city and never be found. There was a garden that was overgrown but deliberate, each plant carefully chosen. There was a library that was temperature-controlled and filled with books. And upstairs, there was a bedroom with a view of the city that rivaled the penthouse. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked. "Since the moment the binding completed," he said. "Since I realized I was going to spend the rest of my life loving you, and I wanted to make sure there was somewhere safe to do it." He knelt down then, and I realized what was happening. The binding didn't require marriage. We were already more connected than any legal vow could make us. But he wanted to do this anyway, wanted to make the human promise in addition to the magical one. "Vera," he said, pulling out a ring that was made of white gold and set with a stone that glowed faintly with magical resonance. "Will you marry me? Will you take my name officially? Will you be my wife as well as my boundmate?" "Yes," I said. And I was crying, which was ridiculous because I was supposed to be a powerful guardian now, supposed to be strong, supposed to be unbreakable. But Dominic pulled me against him and whispered that strength had nothing to do with whether you cried. That power was only real when someone like me wielded it, that he had fallen in love with the waitress who'd saved his life and never stopped. We made love for the first time at the safe house, in that bedroom with the view of the city, and it was slow and tender and magical, in ways that had nothing to do with the binding, and everything to do with the fact that we'd chosen each other. Over and over again, we'd chosen each other. Afterward, lying in the dark with his heartbeat beneath my ear, I thought about the napkin. He'd never actually told me what he'd wanted to write on it. What warning he'd been about to give to a stranger in a diner when violence had interrupted everything. "Do you ever wonder what I was going to write?" I asked. "On the napkin?" He was quiet for a moment. "I was going to write a name. My father's. Someone was trying to kill him, and I was trying to warn a stranger that death was coming to her city whether she was ready for it or not. But I saved you instead." "You saved me," he agreed. "And in doing so, you changed everything. The prophecy says that the guardian will save the keeper of the city, not the other way around. That's how the balance restores itself. That's how power transfers. You were always supposed to save me, Vera. The napkin was just fate's way of making sure you were in the right place at the right time." I thought about that. About the stranger I'd offered coffee to at 2:47 a.m. About the decision to save a bleeding man instead of call for help. About how a single moment of mercy had spiraled into a binding ritual, and an empire and a love story written in magic and blood. "No regrets?" I asked. "Not a single one," Dominic said. "I'd do it all again, just to have this moment with you." The city spread out below us, protected by our binding, watched over by our power. My grandmother's necklace was on the bedside table, glowing faintly in the dark. And I was exactly where I was supposed to be, wrapped up in the arms of a Mafia boss who'd learned to love, protected by magic that had slept for centuries waiting for me to wake up. The waitress who'd written a warning on a napkin had disappeared completely. In her place was a woman with power, with purpose, with a future that stretched into darkness and light in equal measure. And tomorrow, when we returned to the city and the responsibilities that awaited us, I would be ready. Tonight, though, I let myself be just Vera. Just loved, just home.